Hi, everybody. My name is Candace Miller, and I'm one of the co-owners of Interlude Press and Duet Books. Thanks for joining us here today at the Edelweiss Book Fest. I am oh so happy to introduce our twosome here today. This is author C.B. Lee and our managing editor, Annie Harper. I hope that you all know C.B. Lee. She is a Lambda Literary Award nominated writer of young adult science fiction and fantasy. Her works include the Sidekick Squad series and 7 Tears at High Tide from our Duet imprint, the Ben 10 graphic novels from Boom Studios, and her upcoming A Clash of Steel, a Treasure Island remix from Faywell and Friends. Lee's work has been featured in Teen Vogue, Wired Magazine, Hypeable. It was on Tor's Best of Fantasy and Sci-Fi and the American Library Association's Rainbow List. We got to know CB shortly after we launched Interlude about 7 years ago. She'd submitted a YA short story rooted in Selkie lore for an anthology we were planning for the launch of Duet Books. We immediately knew that this should be a book, and it eventually became CB's debut novel, 7 Tears at High Tide. Over the course of working on that book, CB told us that she had this idea for a book about a world of superheroes and a group of teenage friends who unravel a conspiracy. We were absolutely on board. And before Not Your Sidekick was ultimately published in 2016, CB had plans to build that story out over a 4-book series. And with that, the Sidekick Squad was born. It concludes next year with Not Your Hero. But in the meantime, we're going to be celebrating the 5th anniversary of this critically acclaimed and beloved series this September with the launch of a new edition of Not Your Sidekick with previously unpublished bonus content. Here to discuss it with our managing editor, Annie Harper, is CB Lee.
Thank you so much, Candy. I'm so excited to be here with all of you.
This is really exciting for me, and I want to give you advance congratulations on the 5th anniversary of Sidekick.
Thank you. I can't believe it's been 5 years. It's been such a wonderful journey.
It's been so fun from our perspective in the background, just watching that readership develop and grow. So you don't just have Not Your Sidekick, as Candy mentioned, you have the Sidekick Squad series, 3 books so far, which each focused on a different member of the squad. And then next year concludes with Not Your Hero. And you're finishing up that draft right now. So one of the questions I want to ask you is, how is the process different when you're tying everything up? With Sidekick, you were dreaming it up, and now you're tying it up.
I think as a writer, there's very many different stages of the creative process where when you're first drafting, you know the world is your oyster. Anything is possible. And so there's a lot of challenges with, just having such a vast sandbox to play in, and you're creating the world, you're creating the rules. And then moving forward with the 2nd and 3rd in the series, I learned very quickly that, my typical method, if you're a writer, you're probably familiar with the so-called plotter versus pantser dichotomy, which I feel like isn't a true binary of your style. No one's, some people gravitate very strongly towards one style versus the other. And I always was oh, I'm definitely a pantser, fly by the seat of my pants, figure it out as I go along. And some people call this discovery writing, or, figure it out as you go, or I have no idea what I'm doing. But Sidekick did evolve as a plan, or evolved as a story where I was figuring out the world as I was building it, and I had a general idea of what I needed to do. And so I created a roadmap of I always knew where I wanted the story to end. I always knew that I wanted the kids to build a resistance movement. I always knew that there would be different pockets of factions working together, working against each other, and how the true antagonist would be revealed, and all the relationship and interplay between that. Tying it up is such a different process. As I learned, even writing book 2, there was still some more of this discovery process that I was running into. Now that I've set the rules in stone, I cannot retcon myself. I cannot undo what has been done. So even if if you're writing a novel that is from start to finish, and you have the ability to like fix it as you go along. You can go back and like, oh, you know what, I thought of something better. I can change, you know, this element, or I can change this plot point, or put this character here, or invent this new character and have them be there from the very beginning. And so working with my own series with an established, you know, I have to be very aware of like, what have I already established? What are the rules I can and cannot break? And in what ways can I do it? So building, writing books 2 and 3, writing book 3, I think was kind of the critical cornerstone piece, because with book 2, I was still like moving forward and like, all right, I'm laying out my puzzle pieces here. And with book 3, I knew that whatever I wrote, that story would be so crucial to what book 4, the very last in the series, would look like. So just in terms of like knowing that like every step I took in the 3rd book, you know, every question that wasn't answered, I would have to answer in the last. So it's been a challenge, but it's been really fun. It's been such a wonderful journey to work with you along this whole process. I feel very lucky to have like your consistent like macro worldview, and being able to have such a consistent team to work with while building this world.
Yeah, it's really fun for me to see this come to a close, because I'm excited to see how it ends. Just frankly, I don't know the answer to, I know what you've been thinking about some things, but I don't know the answer. So it'll be like Christmas to hear the answers for all of that. But that's craft. Let's talk about feelings for a second. How does it feel to wrap up that series? Because this has been a life-changing series for you, and it has made a huge impact on young readers. So what does it feel like to have it come to a close?
I'm not sure I can describe it entirely. There's a lot of joy that I've had while building this series and writing this, and it definitely has been life-changing. It definitely launched me into a career I didn't think I would get to have, and it's been a beautiful, you know, I've made so many incredible friendships and met so many incredible people, and being able to share my story with others has been like the most rewarding. Like having readers you know, tell me what this story has meant to them consistently has been incredibly beautiful and profoundly rewarding. And every time I think like, you know, if I'm like crying or stuck in writer's block, I'm like, how can I do this? How can I finish this? This is so painful and terrible. And, you know, even writing the difficult parts of the book where it involves like me unearthing or being in like terrible emotional states to feel what the characters are feeling. I'm like, well, you know, it'll all be worth it to finish a story. I think there's, you know, with all the good, there's also a lot of like, you know, I'm also grieving it in a way because it's the end of an era, but also being happy that it happened. You know, it's been such a big part of my life that like it is, you know, and it will always be, you know, it will always be a part of me, and I'll always have these books, these stories, these characters in my heart. But knowing like that, like this particular phase or this era, the active era is coming to a close is a little sad. And so writing it has been really emotional for me, just saying, you know, in a sense, I'm saying goodbye to these characters, and, you know, at least like, you know, closing a door for now, like whether I revisit the world in the future or maybe pick up like like Brendan or one of the younger stories, we'll see. But I think for now there has to be, you know, I think there's storytelling has its own there has to be an end to a story for it to feel like a story, you know. And there are works in progress, and there are you know, works of media that go on and on and on, and they evolve and become something entirely different. And I want this story to have a conclusion that feels right for it.
So earlier this year, we met to talk about what we're talking about today, and then we used part of that interview as part of the wonderful bonus content that's included in the 5th anniversary edition, which comes out in September. And I hope that your readers who have the original will also pick up that copy, because you shared a lot about your influences and your commitment to inclusive stories and representation. It's a great interview. And I remember in that interview that you mentioned you didn't expect Sidekick to catch on the way it did. How did that change your perception of yourself as an author?
I don't know. I don't know if it like I feel like my perception of myself is still my perception of myself. I don't see, I don't know what other people see. And there's a certain amount of pressure to be like, oh my God, like you're this incredible role model person, or like this has changed my life. And I think about like people who said, I'm like, oh, like you changed your life. Like you have the power to do that all along. Like I'm happy. This work means so much to you, and I'm happy that it resonates with you. But I honestly did not expect it to have the reach that it did. And the fact that, you know, it sold hundreds of thousands of copies, it's miraculous. Like I thought, you know, I'm writing the story. How many people are going to read it? I have no idea. And you know, the just, and we talked about this, like the cover reveal, just seeing people excited about it has been so overwhelming, and the overwhelming amount of support from the community has been really beautiful and lovely. And you know, it feels very validating to be seen in a way that like people have told you, or me, people have said like, hey, like you're gonna run like an entire publishing house that publishes queer fiction, or hey, like you're gonna write this story, like I don't think anyone wants to read it, or there's no money to be made in it. And I'm like, oh well, I'm here to tell the story. And you don't know the answer to that, but the answer was that people did want the story and people did want to read it. And that, you know, I hope that many more people, and people continue to discover every day, which is so beautiful to me. And you know, as far as the lasting impact, I think also, you know, with knowing that eyes are on you, knowing that like people are watching and reading, I feel like that comes with a responsibility to not only tell a good story, but do it with respect and do it in a way that like brings good into the world.
You do that so beautifully. And I think the reason that people feel like you changed their life is that part of just feeling seen. Just feeling seen can be enough to help a person change their own life. So I know you hear from readers all the time. They make fan art for you. You told me they're writing fan fiction about the characters, and I've seen them come up to you at book festivals. Aside from feeling seen, which is not a small thing, what are other reasons why you think Sidekick resonates with readers?
I think in some senses, like a superhero story is very relatable, you know, because it's also like so larger than life. I feel like superpowers are such a great storytelling mechanism that, you know, who hasn't wished they had something like some X factor that made them special. And, you know, in a world that constantly tells you you're not for being who you are, the idea of superpowers and using that as a mechanism for people to examine their identity and what power means and what strength and being a hero means has been a lot of fun. And I think just in terms of the friendships and the people within them, I feel like it resonates. I mean, it resonates with me because this is the story that I wanted to have when I was a teenager. And I hope that kids feel, you know, having people from multiple backgrounds and knowing that there isn't a wrong way to be queer, knowing that there's no wrong way to exist, because people have always existed in their way and will continue to exist, and seeing these characters thrive in this like even fantastic far future is powerful. And you know, I'm glad that it resonates, and I hope it continues to.
So for those people who are watching and may not be familiar with Sidekick, I think a great way to inform them about this book is to actually talk about why you chose the title, Not Your Sidekick.
Sure. I mean, we were working on the title for some time, and I think we had almost finished. We were moving towards where we had to have a title to announce it with, and the draft was nearly complete at that point. You know, for a long time it was just named like Untitled Superhero Trilogy, and you know, that was when I imagined it as a trilogy, and then it became a quartet. But it really came out of like this wave of frustration of being young and not seeing myself in media, or like seeing myself but seeing versions of myself that people thought were like, this is what you are like. and what people thought were like, you know, if I have a queer person on TV or in this movie, they're there to be like the best friend. They're there to be the sidekick. Or, you know, if I have a person of color, or if I have, they're automatically like, you know, the story is not about them. They are there to provide set dressing. They're there to provide support. If they exist at all, if they live, and they don't have like agency or a story of their own. So the title, the first title, is Not Your Sidekick, came out of all of that. And at the time, there was a hashtag, I think maybe a year before, that was fairly popular, and it was hashtag Not Your Asian Sidekick. And it was, you know, it was very, you know, for a time on Twitter, a lot of people were like denouncing stereotypes and using it to reclaim themselves and their identities. And I thought that was really beautiful. And I, you know, Jess, the main character in book one, is Chinese and Vietnamese American, in, you know, in the America that the post America that exists in this futuristic world. And so each of the types, so after that, everything fell into place where everything, we're like, well, everything has to fall within this Not Your series title now. So, you know, I thought about like what would be most relevant for each character. What do people want from them? How do they see themselves? What are they reclaiming for themselves? So we have Not Your Villain for Bells, because he's been branded as a villain and he's been framed for this monstrous crime that he didn't commit. And then, you know, that ties into his whole identity and his journey as he becomes a hero in his own right. And then for Emma, who doesn't have any powers, you know, she's kind of found herself, you know, at this point where the Sidekick Squad and everyone is forming this resistance movement. She's really, you know, she has a lot of leadership skills and she wants to make things better. But, you know, people, you know, especially adults in charge are like, well, you don't have any powers. You have to be the backup. You have to do this. And this is the role that we want you to take. And so Emma's whole story is about like figuring out where she belongs and that she's not just like a second, you know, claiming her place at the front of this movement. And for Abby, her story is very like, it deals with a lot of identity because she actually loses her powers in book one, which is a spoiler, but it's also like, you know, if you haven't read the series, you can look forward to meeting her. And but it's such a huge part of her identity. So she struggles with like, how do I reconcile who I am if who I am has been tied to this huge thing that I don't have anymore? And so now, as the resistance movement moves forward to really try and make significant moves against this corrupt government, you know, she starts being branded as a hero in the face of this movement. And so Abby is struggling with so much in that time. And so Not Your Hero is about you know, who she is and defining who that is. And maybe she can be a hero, but for herself, and not necessarily for like to be like the face of something that she cannot be, or what people think she has to be, or that she needs to have. Like, you know, she gets caught up in these struggles to where people are like, well, this is a way you could get your powers back, and she has to examine whether it's worth it.
And that's another reason why the book resonates with young readers and really readers of any age, because it's let me define myself. Each character's book is about how they want to define themselves and in different contexts. So I think you do that wonderfully. So identity across the spectrum is a recurring theme in your books. And I'm wondering why it's so important to you personally to tell those types of stories.
I think it's important, especially like writing for young people, because you're at an age, you're at a time when you are learning who you are. You're figuring out your identity. You're trying on things that are uncomfortable and things that are comfortable, and learning what makes you you. And this is kind of like every, you know, I remember being 16, I remember being overwhelmed. But like, well, you have to define, like, you have to know exactly what you want to do for the rest of life. You have to tell everyone who you are. You write this college application. If you don't get into college, your whole life is over. And all of this, like there's all this pressure riding on so many things. And I think the idea of identity is something that is universal. I think there are a lot of people that continue to work with it as they, you know, grow and become who they are. And there's no, like, it's one of those things, like, I don't think you ever stop growing as a person. Like, who you are at 20 is not the same as who you were at 16, at 30, at 40, at 50. And like each of these people are still you, but you are you, who you are, your identity grows and evolves. And you know, part of the series and why it's important to me is to show people at different stages too, you know, from like someone who's just like, oh, I'm very comfortable with my identity, like Jess is bi. There's no coming out story for her because she's like, oh, like I wanted to write story where it's just she knows who she is. She has a crush on Abby, and they go from there. And for like Emma, who doesn't quite understand her own place in like the asexual and aromantic spectrums, she is learning that, and she's questioning that, and then becoming more confident in where she is on her journey. And that part, it was important to me to show different aspects and different characters too, like multiple characters who are at different places with their identities. And just because, you know, in real life, like some people don't have the opportunity to really sit with who they are, or the luxury to do that, you know, for some time. So I want to say, like, whether you figure it out at like 6 years old, like Bells, or 16, or 60, there's just no wrong way to live your life. And I hope that you're living the best you can.
Yeah, the identity piece is so huge. And especially if you're the books are great for anybody who identifies in any way. And for queer kids, you know, it's especially important because the minute that you realize that you're falling somewhere on that spectrum, there's a whole bunch of labeling that happens. So I think your books are really important because you're talking about a lot of different aspects of the spectrum and handling it really well and handling it maybe not as well, and just from every perspective. And it doesn't feel like I'm older than you, so you might not get the reference, but it doesn't feel like an after-school special where we're supposed to learn something very important. It's just these kids just living and having this adventure, and that's the undercurrent while the adventure is happening.
Yeah, and that very much was important to me too, that the series be fun and not an after school special in the way that like after school specials are like, look at this marginalized group of people, what can we learn from this? Can't you learn to be a more empathetic and understanding and kind person? And then these people and their experiences are then essentially used as like fodder for like, you know, cis able-bodied heterosexual people to be like, oh yeah, well, these are people too. And so that always felt distinctly uncomfortable to me. The idea of someone needing my story to learn empathy. And I'm like, you know, everyone deserves to have a chance to just make their own joy, to have their own adventure. And it doesn't need to be, you know, if you learn something from these stories, great. But I also wanted a space for just queer kids to like have fun and also, you know, fight a corrupt government.
Yeah, I mean, that brings me to my next question, because I remember reading the first draft of Sidekick, and I can even see myself sitting at my kitchen table and just, I said out loud, wow, this is so subversive. And I didn't expect it to be. And I remember I was told a bunch of people in the interlude team, and I told my wife, like, wow, this is because it's an adventure and it's fun, and it's these kids taking on this corrupt government, and there's some very subversive themes built in there, which, you know, I know you pretty well. I did not expect at the time. So you have this fun, exciting, sometimes wacky story with super lovable characters, and yet you take on celebrity culture, corporate greed, political manipulation, censorship. The list is very long, right? But again, it's kind of, I want to say sneaky, but sneaky is such a negative word. It was a little sneaky of you, just a little bit, but in the best way, because it's subversive. And again, no, you're not pounding us over the head with anything. This is a ride, a super fun ride from start to finish. So anybody who's watching this, you know, this is not like, again, let's have this heavy thing about a corrupt government. It's so fun, the whole thing, but also really subversive. So why did you incorporate some of those themes into these books? I've got to know. In fact, I don't think I ever asked you.
Oh, I don't think it's sneaky at all. I feel like it's very obvious from the very get-go. Actually, some of the bonus content One of the very first, like, so the bonus content includes like tidbits of media, like found media from the world. And they originally intended to like go in front of every chapter or just be like interspersed throughout the story. So one of the very first ones that I wrote was based on an actual sign that I saw out in Joshua Tree National Park. And it was a sign that was in a bathroom that just said like, please be aware that these things may be found, you know, in this area. And it listed like a whole paragraph of just like dangers, like wild animals and all this like possible stuff. And I was like, this is so funny because it's like, it sounds like you don't want me to be here, but also like, oh, you're here, watch out for all these things. And so one of the very first things, and one of the bonus contents is a, maybe this will be a bonus content that I'm share on my website because I think we actually cut this. But it's a sign that says like, be aware, you're traveling outside the like populated areas, you may find like lizards, you know, snakes, you know, scorpions, like all of these things, and also all of these things may be affected by radiation. But it's not untrue, but it's also like the type of warnings and the type of like, I think about these little tidbits, these fossilized remnants of a society that tells you like, don't cross the, you know, don't go past this fence or don't do this. And you think about why and what are they hiding. And you know, from the very beginning, it was always like the Sidekick Squad lives in a world that is in some ways very progressive and clean, and it's green, it's got lots of great technology, but in other ways they've actually regressed a lot in terms of like individual rights and having a democratic society. And they live in these very isolated cities across this like vast, you know, continent. And so for me, tackling these issues was important because you know, and I think kids are aware of it too. I think, and it's not something that I want to hide from them in a world that does have these issues, like paying attention to like climate change and paying attention to like consumerism and like who is at, you know, who is the culprit between like, you know, corporations like, oh, you should take shorter showers and you should like watch your energy usage when like, you know, 5 corporations are the ones responsible for like polluting the entire world. And there's a lot of like my own frustrations and anxieties about our world and our political climate that have been tied up in this, and like the whole like take on like celebrity culture. And you know, like at first I thought it was funny, and then I'm like, oh no, this is a real thing. Like, and why, like knowing that like there's this whole farce, right, in this society where superheroes are forced to play a role because there's like ads and sponsorships and cereal boxes, and but it's just, it feeds into this whole cycle of like the public is obsessed with these people and the gossip in their lives, and that in turn is a distraction from the real horrors that their government is doing. And it is something that does happen in real life, like every day there's news, but like, what do you care more about? And there's a level of like oversaturation, I think, of like how much content there is, and then there's like the limited things we do care about, and there's like this vague sense of like, you know, what information do we have accessible, and what outlets are people paying attention to most. That's always been very interesting to me. And as far as like you know, consumerism and like you know, hyper surveillance state and like all of those things, I think are very common to tackle in science fiction, but doing it in this way was an opportunity to poke a little fun at it and just to be like, well, these issues are still here. I don't know if I'll ever write like a very hard, like deep dystopian novel. Maybe I will, but like there's a lot of like, as I was writing, I'm like, oh yeah, this is fun. I'm gonna have these organizations called the Heroes League of Heroes and the you know, the Villains Guild, and these are very like cheesy, fun names where I imagine this is a world that's like, you know, you like old like Batman cartoons where like someone does like pow and bam, and like there's a lot of like fun effects, but they are dealing with like real world issues that exist. So I think that's why it's important to talk about them.
Yeah, and I think the sneaky part is just, it's usually not presented in the way you present it, which is part of this very, very fun adventure. It's not dark. It's not dark. Even when there's dark moments, it's not dark.
I'm tired of a lot of like dark, gritty reboots.
Yeah.
It also, like, it's not like there are horrific things, yes, but I think the approach to them, like, I very strongly resonate with like the idea of like hope punk and the, you know, this is a world where I want people to feel inspired to continue to enact change in their own world. And there are a lot of terrible things happening, but I don't think that's reason enough to give up. You know, I think the world is worth fighting for. And, I think there's a lot of, gritty reboots or comics or whatever that and it's a very specific mood where you're just like, oh, you are overwhelmed with feeling of dread and hopelessness. Like nothing is ever going to change. You just learn that like these are terrible people, and even the heroes are terrible, and they've saved the world, but at what cost? And at great, they have to, there's a lot of like there's fun in that. Like I know that there's value and people enjoy those type of stories, but also those are not me at all.
No,
it's very difficult for me to be like, yes, I'm gonna be here's a Broody McBruderson character that I want to stare brutally across the distance, and like I do enjoy brooding characters, but I also love like making fun of them too. And so having characters like that, if writing any story where I have like a brooding anti-hero, I would want to have like some levity in any story I want, right? And continue, because if I'm not having fun, then the reader's probably not going to have any fun.
Yeah. I wanted to I just have a couple more questions. And one that's really important to me is I love the found family element. The squad is a family, and that family grows and coalesces inside Sidekick as they commit to this common goal. And for me, this was especially resonant because in our queer culture, we rely on our found families. And certainly the world is a more accepting place for queer youth than it was when I was growing up. But when our found families were quite literally our only families, right? Or at least a place where we felt safe and where we could belong. Why do you think we need these stories about found families?
I think it's important to show that family is how you define it. Like it's not just like people that are related to you by blood, but you can create like intimate relationships that are important to you and meaningful you. And I think especially as queer people in the community, that historically and even present like day, I feel like it continues to be a strong, like we are drawn to each other, and there's an understanding and there's a connection of like building relationships. And it feels very queer to me also to build relationships that may or may not be inherently romantic, but defining someone as like, hey, you're part of my family. I'm with you, through thick and thin, and we are building this relationship over like months, years, on the basis of connection. And whether that's romantic or sexual, or like defining like the relationship between Emma and Bells is so important to me, because they have defined each other's family very closely, very early on in their lives, and growing that and having a word to say like, hey, this is a queer platonic relationship. You are important to me. You are my partner. I want you to be my partner. But understanding that like the amazing part about like queer family is that you don't have to decide, like there's no like nuclear model of like, oh, this person is like my cousin twice removed, so that way that is our connection, or like this person's my spouse, or this person's my child. Like there's a lot of like untraditional families that I think have room for that, or don't have like a defined role, like, oh, I'm your godparent, or oh, I'm your your auntie or uncle or whatever. And like having that relationship and getting to define who is important to you, I think is valuable. And there's like in the Sidekick Squad, there's also a lot of like wish fulfillment, because I think I do like all the parents. I made sure, because I didn't want to write parents who were not accepting and loving and supportive of their children. And I understand that there are a lot of people who struggle with that, but I wanted this world to have like the conflicts in this world are all about like the you know, corrupt government and the evil villains and the, you know, flying robots and stuff. And so like they've got more than enough stuff to worry about. And I wanted the parents to be a source of comfort and love and joy. And for kids who didn't have that, to see that, and, you know, to find validation and that was possible.
So my last question is, if you could only choose one thing, what do you think the main thing is you want readers to take away from the books? Just one. I know you have a long list, but if they get any one thing out of it.
I hope readers see that they're valid and their story deserves to be told, and they deserve to be the heroes of their own story and to go out and get it, whatever it is in their journey and wherever they are in their journey is valid and important.
I'm so proud of everything you've written and all you've accomplished in the last 5 years. And I know at Interlude, we couldn't be prouder to have shepherded these books into existence.
Oh, thank you. I've never been, I mean, I'm so honored to work with you and Candy and everyone on the Interlude team. It's been such a joy to be a part of this amazing, like, you know, we've defined our own family, and it's been such a beautiful part of my life that I couldn't be more thankful.
Hearing about the Heroes League of Heroes and the villains, it reminded me how all this time I've always sat and gone, wouldn't this make an awesome graphic novel? And, you know, every time I look at it, I think that Annie's heard it so many times, it's like, no more, no more, no more. But I'm just putting it out into the world. I'd love to see. Thank you so much to CB and Annie today. That was an incredible conversation. It made me very nostalgic. This is a bittersweet moment going into this next year, because it's always hard to say goodbye, but it's such a wonderful series. If you have not introduced yourself to the Sidekick Squad, please do so. You've got a great chance, because the anniversary edition is coming up September 1st. And the Interlude web store will be the exclusive pre-sale source for this anniversary edition. So if you want to be the first to get it, go to store.interludepress.com to pre-order starting July 1st. Also, please be sure to submit your business card over in our virtual booth with the code CB for your chance to be one of the very first to receive this new edition of Not Your Sidekick. And finally, this is one of several conversations we'll be having with authors. Just go ahead and look on the left-hand side of our booth. I believe it'll be left for you. And you'll see a list of author chats that include subjects with panels covering subjects like young adult fiction, sapphic romance, and literary fiction in the queer space. And we'll also have another one-on-one chat with author Julian Winters, who's the author of Running with Lions, How to Be Remy Cameron, and The Summer of Everything. And Julian will have some news to share with everybody. So thank you so much for visiting. Thank you, CB, for sharing your time, and the Sidekick Squad with everyone. We adore these novels. And everyone, thanks for joining us, and enjoy BookFest.
Thank you.